If you've made it thus far, I just want to say, first and foremost, thank you so much for your support. I appreciate all of you that are here listening to how I became the person that I am today. Your interest and support means the world to me. And more importantly, I want to create a community for those of you who have gone through your own journey and you don't know how to navigate it, or you don't know how to speak on it, which you don't have to. This is my way of healing. You don't have to be public about your story to heal. This is just something that I'm feeling compelled to do because I want to create a community for those of you who are struggling, who are trying to find ways to make it through that, haven't found their successful tool to do so. Life's hard for everybody, so I'm not looking for a pity party or a woe was me. I have shared my story with people over the course of my lifetime, and I shared it with somebody recently, and this person has told me on several occasions, like, your resilience is amazing and you should write a book. So I did. Not finished, I'm writing as I go. But as I was writing this book, I'm like, you know what, wow, this is really helping me heal. This is really, I feel like I'm finding my purpose almost in these writings, and getting out here and telling my story and helping other people who are struggling. So that's why I decided I don't think that I want to go the book route. I think that I want to be a personality, a face forward personality that can be somebody for those of you who are struggling, that can answer questions, that can help guide you along the way. So with that, once again, I can't express my appreciation more of the support that I've gotten so far and the kind words. It means more than you guys know, seriously and truly. I'm not sure how long these episodes will be, just because once again, I'm kind of, writing the episodes as I go. I'll probably be dropping episodes weekly to give me time to write and edit and all of that good stuff. I'm set up in my kitchen against my curtains. I don't have the fancy equipment. I don't have the mics, all that, so bear with me. I'm new to all of this recording and editing, but I am gonna start this from the beginning despite me reading the first 2 pages on different videos. I'm gonna read this from the beginning for anyone that hasn't seen it. I just want to put a trigger warning out there that there is talks of child abuse in these writings. There is talks of childhood trauma. There is talks of toxic relationships. This is a heavy story, but once again, it's mine and it's my brother's, and I feel he deserves to have his story heard. So with that, let me stop yapping and I will start reading. I've always been a survivor, but I didn't know that back then. Back then I was just a little girl, quiet, eager to please, and desperate to keep the peace in a world that felt far too chaotic for somebody my size. At 5 years old, I thought home was supposed to be a safe place, where love was gentle and the adults always protected you. But I learned quickly that wasn't always true. I became a people pleaser out of necessity, conditioned to believe that being good and staying quiet might save me from the anger and chaos swirling around me. I learned how to hold my breath in moments of tension, to anticipate the moods of people around me, to disappear when conflict started brewing. My survival depended on it, or at least that's what I believed. But the weight of all that silence eventually became too much for me to carry. By the time I reached my teenage years, all of the fear, pain, and resentment I had buried for so long started to surface. I didn't want to please anyone anymore. I didn't want to be small or quiet. I was angry at everyone and everything. At the people who had hurt me. At those who stood by and let it happen. And most of all, at myself for believing I ever had to endure it. I lashed out at the world thinking that if I kept people at arm's length, I couldn't be hurt again. My anger became my shield, my rebellion, my weapon. But the truth is, I was just as scared then as I had been as a child. I wore my anger like armor, but inside, I was still that little girl, afraid of being abandoned, betrayed, or hurt. I thought that I was protecting myself, but all I was doing was adding more walls, more distance, and more loneliness. Now I'm a woman, standing at the crossroads of who I was and who I want to be. I'm learning what it means to take down the armor piece by piece, to let myself trust without bracing for betrayal, to be soft without feeling weak. I'm discovering that being strong doesn't mean being hard, and that vulnerability doesn't have to be terrifying. It's a journey that I'm still on. One thing I know for sure is that healing doesn't all come at once. It's a process, messy, imperfect, and often uncomfortable. But it's worth every step. As I reflect on my life, I see how each chapter was shaped by the one before it. The quiet little girl, the hurt rebellious teen, and the woman that I am now. They're all parts of me, pieces of a puzzle that I'm still putting together. This story is not just about the pain that I endured. It's about how I'm learning to move forward, to forgive, to trust, to find balance between strength and softness. This isn't an easy story to tell. It's raw, it's messy, and it's heavy. But it's mine. And I'm sharing it because I know what it feels like to feel like you're drowning in your own story, to wonder if the pain will ever stop. I'm here to tell you it can. Healing is messy, but it's possible. My journey begins here. Jordan's story, the beginning of my own. Jordan Mitchell, a 9-year-old boy from Ohio, tragically passed away on December 27, 2002. Jordan died from blunt force trauma to the head, inflicted during beatings over the course of several days. According to the sheriff, his mother's boyfriend said he had lost his temper with Jordan for not following instructions. Jordan was known to be a football fan, his favorite shirt being a Browns football jersey. In the aftermath, Everett Moore was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and attempted child endangerment, receiving a 15-year sentence. Jordan's mother, Heidi Mitchell, was sentenced to 4 years for child endangerment. Sad story, right? Well, that story is part of mine. I'm Allegra. Jordan is my brother who tragically passed away when I was just 5 years old. For years, I struggled with the weight of his loss, trapped in a cycle of survival. In obituaries, we often see survived by. In Jordan's, my name, Allegra McLean, was listed as somebody who survived him. For a long time, that was true. I was merely surviving, carrying the weight of loss, trauma, and unanswered questions about justice. But surviving is not enough. This story is about moving beyond survival. It's about finding strength in the unthinkable, transforming pain into resilience, and sharing my story in the hopes that it inspires others to confront and heal from their own adversaries. Jordan's story doesn't end with his tragic passing, and mine doesn't end with merely surviving. Together, they're part of a bigger narrative of what it means to rise unbroken. Part 1. June 2002. It was the kind of summer day that felt like a dream. My mom packed up the 4 of us, me, just 4 years old, my brother Jay, 12, my little brother Micah, 3, and Jordan, 9, and took us to the beach. She took us places all the time. Now that I'm a mom of 3 myself, I look back and wonder how she managed it. I have 3 typical children. She had 2 children with special needs, both adopted, and dealing with medical and behavioral challenges. And then me and my little brother, just 22 months apart. Sounds overwhelming, right? It was. And you'll see soon just how overwhelming it could get. That day at the beach, I was in my own little world. The sand was warm and soft under my bare feet, sticking in my fingers as I combed through it for shells. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore mixed with the shouts and laughter of other kids nearby. It was chaos, but it was the kind I didn't mind. With 3 brothers, 2 with special needs, I learned early how to carve out peace for myself, even in the middle of all the noise. As I carefully added shells to my bucket, I hear a sharp, "Hey, hey!" I looked up confused. A boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with the kind of face that screamed trouble, was running towards me. Before I could figure out what he wanted, he shoved me hard, knocking the bucket out of my hands and scattering my collection into the sand. My heart raced as I stared at him, stunned and frozen. But before I could even think about what to do, Jordan was there. He appeared like a flash, snatching the bucket back and shoving the boy so hard he stumbled backward onto the sand. "Don't ever touch my sister again," Jordan yelled, his voice loud and steady. He grabbed my hand and stayed with me for the rest of the time, his presence like a shield against the world. That was Jordan, fiery, fearless, and fiercely protective. He didn't take shit from anyone, and he made sure no one would hurt me either. That day I clung to his hand, I felt safe. Jordan's love and protection were constants in my life, and I leaned on them more than I ever realized. After he was gone, the world felt colder, harder. I missed that safety more than I knew how to say. At home, things were different. That day at the beach was a rare escape from the tension that lived with us in our small 2-bedroom condo in a small township in Ohio. My mom had her own room, which she shared with her boyfriend, Everett. The 4 of us kids, Jay, Jordan, and Micah, and me, shared the other bedroom. Our lives were crammed together, loud and chaotic in ways that sometimes felt normal, but often didn't. Where was Jay during the seashell incident, you ask? Jay was different. He was born to his biological mother, who had used crack cocaine and alcohol while pregnant with him. He had several medical issues and was diagnosed with autism. Although he was 12 at the time, developmentally he was closer to my age. Jay was gentle and, in his own way, a calming presence in our noisy, unpredictable world. Jordan's story was similar in some ways. Like Jay, he had been born into a life of hardship, but he was higher functioning. Jordan had a fire in him, a spark that made him stand out, even in the midst of chaos. How did Mom end up with these 2 boys? She worked as a nurse caring for children with complex medical needs and fell in love with both Jay and Jordan. She adopted Jay first, then Jordan shortly after. Shortly after Jordan joined our family, she got pregnant with me. After she had me, that's when Everett came into the picture. Everett wasn't my father. Before a time, he was the man who lived with us, the one who tried to fill that role. My biological dad, though, wasn't much better. The relationship was a cycle, fighting, leaving, cheating, forgiving, repeat. By the time I was just over a year old, it was over for good. After that, my dad didn't maintain much of a relationship with me. He was a ghost in my life, someone I was vaguely aware of but didn't really know. He'd pop in and out, making promises he never kept. Sometimes he showed up with a gift or a smile, as if that made up for the months of silence in between. Other times, I wouldn't hear from him at all. I'd wait by the door looking out the window, wondering if today would be the day he decided to be my dad. Most of the time, it wasn't. As a child, I didn't fully understand what his absence meant, but I felt in the way I craved something I couldn't name. Saw other kids with their dads at school events at the park and wondered why I didn't have that. I wonder what was wrong with me that made him stay away. Was I not good enough? Did I do something wrong? These were all the questions that lived in the back of my mind, unanswered and unspoken. But as I grew older, my perspective shifted. I realized it wasn't about me, it was about him. My dad wasn't the man I needed him to be and never would be. It took me years to come to terms with that, but once I did, his absence became less of a wound and more of a scar. It's something that I carry, but it didn't hurt as much anymore. The truth is, my dad's absence is one of the least impactful things that I've endured. By the time that I was old enough to understand what a father was supposed to be, I'd already learned that the people who are supposed to protect you aren't always capable of doing so. His absence hurt, but it was nothing compared to what was coming. Still, I think he deserves an honorable mention, if only to give you a full picture of what my mom and I were working with. His absence, combined with Everett's presence, set the stage for the chaos that would define so much of my childhood. Because what came next is where the real story begins. Just 22 months after I was born, my mom welcomed my little brother, Micah. Technically, he's my only biological sibling. Though we had different fathers. You might be wondering, how does this start the story? Well, I'm sure some of you have already connected the dots about who Micah's father is. And for those who haven't, don't worry, it'll all make sense soon. I'm lying in the bunk bed I shared with Micah. The room is dark, except for the faint glow of the streetlight creeping through the blinds. On the other side of the room, Jay and Jordan are asleep in their bunks. Their soft, rhythmic breathing, the only sound breaking the stillness. I stare at the ceiling, my throat dry and scratchy. I'm thirsty. Something about the quiet feels too heavy, like the house is holding its breath. After lying there for what feels like forever, I finally work up the courage to climb down from the bunk. I tiptoe across the room, careful not to wake my brothers, and step out into the hallway. The carpet feels rough against my bare feet as I creep down the stairs, each step slow and deliberate, trying to avoid the creaky ones. I just want a glass of water, but even at 5 years old, I can feel the tension in the air. Something isn't right. When I reach the bottom of the stairs, I hear them. Raised voices coming from the kitchen. My mom and Everett are arguing. Her voice is shaking, breaking on words I can't quite make out. His voice is sharp and low and controlled in a way that makes my stomach twist. I inch closer, peeking around the corner. The overhead light casts long shadows on the wall, their movements distorted and almost menacing. My mom is crying. I can see her shoulders shaking as she pleads with him about something I don't understand. His tone grows colder, the words cutting through the air, even though I can't make out what he's saying. Then it happens. He cocks back his arm and strikes her across the face. The sound of the slap echoes through the kitchen, cutting through the quiet like a thunderclap. She stumbles, slightly clutching her cheek, her sobs growing louder. My stomach feels heavy, like I swallowed a stone. My chest tightens and my breath comes out in a quick, shaky burst. My legs won't move even though my brain is screaming at me to run. I didn't know what I was more afraid of. Him seeing me standing there or the fact that I couldn't do anything to stop it. I don't know how long I stand there frozen, but eventually panic takes over. I turn and bolt back up the stairs, my little legs moving as fast as they can. Tears are already streaming down my face. By the time I reach my bed, I bury myself under the covers, shaking and grasping for air. My heart pounding so hard it feels like it might break free from my chest. I cry myself to sleep that night, but the image of my mom's pain stays with me, replaying in my mind over and over. The sound of the slap, her sobs, the way she looked so small and helpless is burned into my memory. I remember wondering, was this normal? Was this what families were supposed to look like? I didn't know the answers, but I knew it didn't feel right. That night changed everything. It was the first time I realized that the people who were supposed to protect me might not be able to protect themselves, and that was just the beginning. When I was 5, I watched my mother endure Everett's anger. I watched her toxic relationship bleed into every corner of our family like water seeping under a door. Slow, silent, and unstoppable. What I didn't understand was how deeply those moments would shape me. How the fear that gripped me as a child would morph into anxiety as I grew older. How the warped view that chaos equals home would become a toxic belief that I'm still working to undo. Even now, 20 years later, the memories remain sharp, so vivid they replay in my head like scenes from a movie that I can't stop watching. As the memories swirled in my head, one stood out sharper than the others. A night that forever shattered my sense of safety. I was just a little girl, sitting on the edge of my bed, the covers tangled around my legs. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the bathroom door across from me, left slightly ajar. The glow cast long, thin shadows on the wall, creating shapes that danced and flickered as if they were mocking me. There they were, my mom, pinned against the wall, and Everett, his fist flying, as he shouted words I couldn't fully understand but would never forget. She cried out, "Please stop," over and over, her voice cracking under the weight of fear and desperation, but he didn't stop. The sound of his fist landing on her, the dull thuds mixed with her sobs, made my heart pound so hard I thought it might burst. My tiny legs dangled off the edge of the bed, frozen as if the floor beneath me might swallow me whole if I dared to move. I wanted to scream, to run to her, to stop him, but I couldn't. All I could do was sit there and watch, helpless. When it was finally over, I curled up on my bed, my knees pressed to my chest, shaking uncontrollably. The sounds of her sobs echoed in my ears long after the house fell silent. Long after I had buried myself under the covers in a futile attempt to hide from it all. That night in the bathroom was just the beginning. Everett didn't stop with my mom. As the days turned into months, he began to use her fear as a weapon, manipulating her, wearing her down, until she couldn't stand up to him anymore. Once he knew she wouldn't fight back, his control extended to us. It started small, almost unnoticeably. Ever positions himself as the enforcer in the house, taking over discipline. My mom, perhaps hoping his strictness would bring some kind of order to our chaotic lives, let him take the lead. I think she believed it would help, but fear isn't order, it's just chaos in disguise. With Jordan and Jay both having behavioral challenges, they bore the brunt of his wrath. The word discipline doesn't feel right, though. What he did wasn't discipline, it was punishment. Violence masked as authority. I remember sitting outside my room, my knees tucked to my chest as I listened to the sound of Jordan's screams. The thuds of something heavy, the pleading in his voice. Please, I'll be good. Please stop. The walls couldn't shield us from the terror inside. We all felt it. One of Micah's only memories of his father as a child was ever taking Jordan into a room, closing the door, and the screaming that followed. Even as a toddler, Micah knew something was deeply wrong. I think my mom hoped that letting Everett take over would bring some sort of order to our home. Maybe she thought his strictness might calm the chaos, but it didn't. Those screams echoing through the walls did something to me. They made me quieter, smaller, desperate to avoid the same fate. At the same time, they left behind a guilt I've carried ever since. The guilt of not doing more, of not being able to help. Maybe that's why I've always felt the need to protect myself, to keep my guard up, to be defensive. It's as if I've been bracing for the next storm ever since. What started as discipline quickly became something far darker. It wasn't just Jordan and Jay. It became all of us, except for Micah, in different ways. And no matter how much I tried to shield myself, there was no escaping the storm that Everett brought into our lives. While Jordan and Jay bore the brunt of his physical wrath, I became a target of something equally insidious. His punishment didn't leave bruises on my skin, but they left scars in places that I'm still trying to heal. I remember the time he locked me in the closet as punishment. I don't remember what I had done to deserve it, but I remember the darkness. It felt endless, suffocating, as if the walls were closing in. When I couldn't hold it any longer, I peed my pants. The shame was unbearable. That's the thing about his abuse. It was designed to make me feel powerless and broken. And then there were nights I was a little girl with big fears, plagued by nightmares I couldn't control. I'd wake up trembling, only to find that I wet the bed again. But instead of comfort, I was met with his rage. He'd scream at me, his voice sharp, unrelenting, as though my fear was a personal failing. Those nights made me dread sleeping, made me afraid of my own body's reaction to the terror that I couldn't escape. In those moments, I learned to suppress everything. Fears, tears, even my voice. I thought that if I could just be quiet enough, invisible enough, maybe I could avoid his wrath. Mom and grandmother often say that as a child I was such a people pleaser, desperate to keep the peace. Looking back, I know it was because I had been conditioned to stay quiet, not make waves, or face the punishment that would follow. But as I grew older, something inside me shifted. The quiet, people-pleasing little girl gave way to somebody fueled by anger, rage, and defiance. It wasn't a conscious transformation. It was survival. I was determined to prove that nobody could ever hurt me again. I built walls piece by piece, layering my fear and pain with a tough exterior I thought would protect me. Yet, even in that defiance, a part of me remained an echo of a girl who once tried so hard to keep the peace. Even now, I catch myself apologizing for things that aren't my fault, bracing for criticism that's not coming. Sometimes I still hear his voice replay in my mind. Not words, but the tone, the weight of it, as though he still has power over me. It's like a ghost I can't quite shake, haunting the edge of my thoughts. For a long time, I didn't know how to silence these voices. I didn't realize that I didn't have to carry the shame and fear that he left behind, that they weren't mine to hold. Over time, I began to understand that I could rewrite the narrative that he tried to force on me. I could reclaim my story and redefine who I was, not quiet, not invisible, but resilient and unbroken. Even as a child, the fear ever instilled in me followed me everywhere, shaping my thoughts and reactions in ways I didn't fully understand. I carried it with me like a shadow, creeping into moments that should have felt safe. Remember how anxious I'd feel every afternoon at daycare watching the door, hoping to see my mom's face instead of his. The waiting was unbearable, each minute stretching into an eternity. I'd stay with my stomach in knots, my hands fidgeting with the hem of my shirt. Dreading the moment Everett would walk through the door. His presence was heavy, suffocating, and even at that age I understood his arrival meant something bad could follow. On rare days, my mom was able to pick me up. It felt like the sun breaking through the storm clouds. One of those days is etched in my memory like it happened yesterday. I remember sitting in the small, brightly colored room where we waited for our parents. The walls were covered in children's artwork, smiling suns and stick figure families. But none of it felt comforting. I was too busy watching the door, hoping and praying to see my mom's face. When I saw her walk in, I was elated. Relief washed over me like a wave. I ran to her, thrilled to see her for once instead of Everett. For a moment, everything felt okay. But as I got closer, something felt different. She was wearing her hair in a new way, loose, covering part of her face. I didn't think much of it at first, but then my teacher noticed it too. "Oh, what happened to your face?" the teacher asked, her voice curious but kind. My mom brushed it off with a practiced smile. "Oh, I fell," she said, the lie slipping out effortlessly. But as I reached her, I saw the truth. A black eye, dark and swollen, hiding just beneath her hair. I froze. The elation I felt moments earlier replaced by something heavy and unfamiliar. I knew what had really happened. My chest filled with sadness, my little heart breaking for her. But at the same time, I felt a strange sense of relief, one I didn't fully understand then. If they'd been fighting, it probably meant that Everett wouldn't be around for a few days. For a child, that felt like a small victory, a brief reprieve from the storm. It was a strange mix of emotions, grief for her pain, but also a selfish relief that I wouldn't have to face him. Even now, that duality makes me feel guilty, though I know I was just a scared little girl trying to make sense of it all. I didn't have the words to articulate it then, but that moment stuck with me. It was a reminder that safety was always temporary, that calm could always turn into chaos in an instant. From then on, I lived with the constant hum of anxiety, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. It wasn't just Everett, it was the uncertainty, the lack of control, the feeling that no matter how good things seemed, danger was always around the corner. I became hypervigilant, scanning for signs of trouble, the way some kids scan for toys or treats. A raised voice, a quick movement, even the way someone walked into the room could set my heart racing. Looking back, I realized how much my childhood was shaped by that constant state of alertness. I wasn't just surviving Everett, I was surviving the ripple effects of his presence, the fear and tension that seeped into every part of my life. And yet, even in the darkest moments, there were glimmers of hope. That day at daycare, as I held my mom's hand and walked to the car, I remember feeling the tiniest bit of comfort. She was there for that moment, and it was enough. That is all I have for the first episode. As much as I would love to continue, I have to save some for the next. And once again, I just want to thank everybody for your support. It definitely makes it easier for me to be this vulnerable, knowing that there are people out there that are benefiting from hearing this and that I'm helping people. Thank you so much for being invested in this journey and for listening and for caring. And for those of you who knew that little girl, I'm sure you're feeling your own feelings around the situation. And I can't thank you guys enough who were around when I was that little girl, who knew or didn't know, because a lot of you contributed to helping me feel normal when I very obviously was not a normal child. So I will keep you guys updated on when I'm going to post the next section. And once again, I can't thank you enough for all of the support and kind words that I've received thus far. So don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, share. Obviously, the more engagement, the better. Not because I'm trying to monetize on this, but because the more people that can hear my story, that can relate, that I can potentially help, the better. So thank you again. With all that said, my comments are open. If you have any questions that you think that you'd like for me to address any feedback. I'd love to hear feedback. That's one of the reasons why I decided to share it this way versus in a book, because I can't open it up to you guys to, we want to hear more of this, or we want you to elaborate more on this. I'd love to. I'm an open book at this point. I feel I'm being very vulnerable because I feel like I need to. Those of you who know me probably have never seen this side of me before. I've usually been very closed off. I don't show much emotion, and when I do, at least back in the day, it was anger. And I feel like seeing of this vulnerable, serious side of me is not something that really any of you guys have seen. So here's to turning a new leaf. 2025, we're healing, we're on a healing journey. And those of you who have your own stories and you have questions or you want to share them with me, my messages are always open, my comments are always open, so don't hesitate to reach out. And once again, I seriously cannot thank everybody enough for all the kind words that I've received so far and all the support that I've gotten. Until next time, bye.